All right,
I
this
didn't.
is a technological breakthrough for Leonard. Okay, well, there's a lot of really fascinating things happening next week that are kind of back to something that I certainly have been waiting for, and Frank will certainly talk about it too. It's the whole emerging space tourism market and what that means and where it's going to go. But let me go to the second. This crew went up September 16th, landed September 18th. They flew on a Elon Musk booster and his capsule, inside his capsule, a Dragon, and very successful. These were, we had a hard time in the media trying to figure out how to call these people as non-professional, or citizen space travelers or whatever. So you pick, but they're four really interesting people with a very diverse set of backgrounds and a very successful mission. The one thing that struck me in this, other than it was all successful, because I was on pins and needles here, because if something happened, it could have set back everything. But I was fascinated with this new design that Elon Musk and SpaceX came up with, which is they basically took out the docking adapter. Not basically, they did take out the docking adapter. And when that cone comes off or up and fits into position, it revealed a really first-class transparent dome that they got to look at the Earth. I think it was in unprecedented scope compared to, I'm always going back to the Mercury capsule, only had a little porthole. But wow, some of the pictures that came back from that transparent dome were very spectacular. I hope we see that show up more often. This is a very interesting thing. They're taking off. This is a Russian crew, 3 people going up to the space station in Earth orbit. They'll stay 12 days, but in that 12 days, these 3 are involved in a video shoot. They actually are making a movie on the International Space Station called Challenge. The people on the left there that you see, the woman and the middle guy, they're, oh no, it's the, let's see, let me think here. It's the woman, and then the guy on the right is the director. Anyway, the guy that's in the middle is the cosmonaut that's flown before, maybe a couple times, but so anyway, they're going to be up there making a movie. Just another aspect of space tourism, and we'll see how they do. And also on October 12th, Tuesday, Jeff Bezos is going to fly 4 people on another suborbital flight on the New Shepard, and that's coming up here next week. And if rumor has it, and it's real, William Shatner of Star Trek fame is going to be on board as one of the 4. They probably going to announce next week who the other 2 are going to be. So that's happening. And then just last week, late last week, the FAA gave clearance to Richard Branson to begin flight operations out of New Mexico, carrying up, again, suborbital tourists. He got in trouble, actually, nobody knew it, but on the first flight with Branson and this crew, the pilots came down in a way that the FAA didn't like, in the sense it veered off the kind of a programmed trajectory. So the FAA got in there and stymied any follow-on flights very rapidly, but they just gave the go-ahead. Branson and his team convinced FAA that they fixed all the issues, and the FAA believes all that, and so they're going to fly probably next month, this month, probably toward the mid-October range is what I thought I heard go by. So major suborbital and orbital flights coming up with space tourists. Again, this is a big development in the sense of, if you've just been waiting for the space telescope to show up, it is. It's going to go through the Panama Canal on the way to French Guiana, but it's in pretty good shape. They're going to launched this thing on an Ariane 5 booster from French Guiana. And December 18th is the date now. And let's wish that well, because it's a significant amount of work and effort that has gone into this space telescope for many, many years. Cost overruns, lots of issues, but everybody is pretty happy with the way it's ready to fly. I always kind of come back to this because I'm always interested and suspicious at the same time. The robotic space plane that the Air Force has up there in Earth orbit, it just winged past 500 days plus days. It's been up there, and nobody knows quite what it's doing. It has some experiments that we do know that are on there, but by and large, we don't know what kind of activities it's going through. But it's, as the year closes and we get into the next year, it could conceivably stay up the longest of any of the flights so far of this kind of vehicle. So, and it's got a couple hundred more days to go for that. Anyway, it's worth keeping an eye on the Air Force. Really exciting news from Mars. Lots of different things happening. The Mars Perseverance rover, shown here in Jezero Crater. If you look down at the rock at the bottom, there's 2 holes in there. It successfully drilled into that and put those drill samples into these tubes that the rover will eventually drop onto the surface of Mars. And eventually we're going to have a mission to go retrieve those samples and then fly them back to Earth. But a very complicated robot. It's doing really well. The amazing amount of capability this thing has already shown, and the helicopter flights that it's part of. So that's really good. And this is what we're headed for in the 2030s is, gathering up these samples that Perseverance would have laid down on the surface. And so we're working with the European Space Agency to create a really multifaceted project for a return sample and bringing those samples back to Earth to get them in labs and do better analysis of them down here with new kinds of equipment. We're in a very interesting time where, the Earth, Sun, Mars position is eclipsing communications from Earth to Mars. So all of our landers and orbiters for NASA are basically in silent mode for several more weeks. And so there's no science activity going on with these vehicles. Let me back up before I forget anything. Yeah, that's just NASA. China still has an active rover on the surface of Mars, and it's, it's in the quiet mode too. In several weeks from now, we'll all get realigned. So the communications between Earth and Mars will be reactivated, and we'll resume imagery and doing science. Maybe Clark I don't know if Clark wants to say anything on this one, but this is one of his planets. This is Pepe Colombo, and this is a joint European-Japanese mission. Flew by Mercury on October 1st, got some pretty spectacular pictures in a flyby mode. It's taken a while to get back to Mercury. It's got a lot of different kind of flybys as for gravitational assist to realign it with getting into orbit of Mercury, which is, I think I wrote down Mercury, begin orbiting Mercury in 2025. So anyway, it's done those flybys. And then China, keep an eye. Yeah, go ahead, Clark.
Yeah, since you mentioned my name,
yeah,
I was actually surprised. I was unaware that Pepe Colombo was doing one of its orbital corrections by flying past Mercury and taking these pictures. But as you said, it's not going to actually get there into orbit for several more years. but Messenger was in orbit around Mercury and got a lot of wonderful data. But Bepi-Colombo is really a much more extravagant mission. It's got two parts. It has it's going to orbit much closer to the particularly southern hemisphere of Mercury than Messenger was able to. And then it has a separate orbiter that goes around and studies the magnetosphere and so on for Mercury. So when it gets there, it's going to be an amazing mission, but it's several more years.
Right. It actually makes a gravity assist by your house, doesn't it? Okay, it's all over the place. It's really done. It's flown by Venus, for a gravity assist, and here's a Mercury gravity assist for flyby. So yeah, pretty striking pictures though. The camera works great. China next this couple weeks from now will continue building its space station. They had a very successful human mission to the station here. They just returned a few days ago, a 3-person crew. They really checked out the station, kind of outfitted it with life support equipment, checked things out, did 2 spacewalks to use a robot arm and do some other outside work on the station. So the next human mission, they just launched a refueling craft up there a few days ago, and it's linked up to the station and has all this new cargo. It's an uncrewed cargo vehicle, but China, they may have a delay, but I think it's still in this month. The next crew, which will have a woman on it, a 3-person crew, and they'll go up and live in that space station for 6 months, while the last crew that was there were only there for 90 days or so. So they're moving along on their space station. And just for fact's sake, the Space Force, the U.S. Space Force, has new uniforms. So if you're interested in joining, this is what you could look like. It's a cross between galactic, some kind of, I saw all kinds of references to this uniform that they stole from sci-fi. But anyway, this is the final uniform. People were upset because it looked ill-fitting, but I don't know, she looks okay. Anyway, last thing, we did a UFO Zoom not too long ago, and I'm keeping my eye on what's happening with this new UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. The government's in there pretty deep, coming up with reports. They did one preliminary report, but there's another one coming. So keep an ear to what this is really going to signify, if anything. But the government is set up shop now to actually crank out reports kind of on a regular basis. So there you go. I think that's it. Thank you.
And then wait, before
Leonard, there's actually one more thing you
Okay.
might have mentioned, but in less than a couple weeks, Lucy is going to
Yeah.
be the mission that's actually been developed here in Boulder, that has a spacecraft going out to study the Trojan asteroids. It's I think the launch window opens on October 14th.
Okay.
And that's when the launch happens. And it's gonna be studying the Trojan asteroids out in Jupiter's orbit for, I don't know, a decade or a decade and a half or something like that.
Okay, good. Thanks for bringing that up. I missed that one.
okay. And Carolyn's on there. Carolyn, do you want to say a few words about your star party, and then we'll have Leonard introduce Frank?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Hi there, everybody. So some of you showed up at our Gilpin County Star Party on September 3rd, and it was really kind of a great success. I want to thank everybody for bringing your telescopes. And pointing out the sky to everybody. It worked out really well. Well, we're going to do it again on October 23rd. The Gilpin County Community Center is having something called a spooky walk, which starts about 5 o'clock. So if you have kids or grandkids you want to bring for a spooky walk and some trick or treating, we'll do that. And then about 9 o'clock, we'll start stargazing when everybody wants to. I think that the moon comes up about 8:45 or something like that. So we'll start some moon gazing. So if any of you who showed up the last time would like to show up again and bring telescopes, you're welcome to do so. And I'll post more details on the Facebook page and send out an email to everybody when we have the final details set up.
Okay, great. Are you?
Okay.
Carolyn, who was that fellow with that super scope that he was showing everybody? That was really interesting thing.
I don't know, but I looked out at the parking lot and people were pulling up and pulling telescopes out of their cars. Just blew me away. I think there was like 10 or 11 telescopes there. Those kids drove all the way up from Denver to do stargazing. There were two couples that came up from Denver and they were one of them. I probably have their names somewhere. I can let you know, but I was really impressed.
Okay.
Well, I thought the guy with the computer was the one that went to Antarctica.
No, that's Wayne who's on or was on here.
No, I don't think so. This was a younger fellow, but anyway, I have their email. I think I have emails for everybody, but I need to go find that sheet.
Okay.
Well, let's get to Frank. He's out in Boston. We don't want him to get too tired out there.
It's 2 hours difference. Hey,
But Frank, go ahead. What do you want?
oh, Frank, where do you live exactly? What town are you near?
I live in Natick, which is Metro West, we call it,
Okay.
just outside of Boston.
Okay, because Carolyn.
Frank, I spent 13 years living in Groton. So
Oh,
just kind of
okay.
up the road from you. Yeah, we moved back here about 13 years ago.
Yeah. and
Oh, well,
Carolyn
we
was-
miss you. Come back.
Yeah, no, we do get back every once in a while.
Good.
Carolyn was one of the editors of Sky and Telescope magazine when she was.
Oh,
here, too.
great. Yeah. Wonderful.
All right. Well, I tell you, from a writer's standpoint, I gotta admit something right up front. We all write to try to get remembered. As more people write, it's harder to get remembered. But Frank came up with this overview effect, and I've been jealous ever since I heard it. I said, this is the kind. This thing has gone on, and people embraced it, and you always. You just say it and it's almost automatically, what it's about. So that's just me being jealous of coining a term that has long lasted, unbelievable, and it will become even more significant as we move out. But Frank White is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard College. He's a member of Phi Beta Kappa and a Rhodes Scholar. And Barb said he earned an MPhil, which I assume it's not Master of Philanthropy, but philosophy probably.
Yeah. Master of Philosophy and Politics, actually.
Yeah, from Oxford, where he was a member of New College. The fourth edition of Frank's best-known book, The Overview Effect, Space Exploration and Human Evolution, was published by Multiverse Publishing, a division of Multiverse Media LLC this year. A film called Overview, based largely on his work, has had more than 8 million plays on Vimeo,
Vimo.
whatever it is.
I think so.
Okay. Frank is president of the Human Space Program Incorporated, a nonprofit organization based on an idea for a global space project initially proposed in the Overview Effect. He continues to be an active writer on this topic and a participant in a lot of different workshops. And we really thank you for taking the time and being with us today, Frank. Good to see you after all these years too.
You too, Leonard. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm going to go into a little detail about how that term the overview effect came to be. And I think you'll see I had no control over it, Leonard. It just happened. I'll talk a little more about that, but thank you for your thoughts about it. I hope it does live on. And to be honest, I've been surprised at the extent to which it has gained traction, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So since this is SkyWatchers group, I thought I would try to talk a little bit about the relationship of the overview effect and astronomy. And they are connected, but I don't know if the connections are seen every time. So let me share my screen and go right into the PowerPoint here. So what I want to do really is go into slideshow.
Right.
Oh, I think I lost it there.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. Right here.
There we go.
And then I think if you go over past animations to slideshow, it should get rid of the thumbnails.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
And then
I want to go to play
play
from
from
the
the start.
start,
Yeah,
right?
there you
There
go.
we go. All right, so what we're going to do is talk about the overview, effect, and astronomy. And I want to start with what I call the wisdom of Masaki. Back in the day, before I coined the term, I was very interested in space exploration anyway, and I was always looking for an audience, and it was pretty hard to come by. I used to take my son Josh to daycare every morning, and I found out that Howie, who ran the daycare center, had a vague interest in space exploration. And I, regaled him with these ideas of daycare in orbit. I said, Howie, you can't even manage these little kids on Earth. Imagine them floating around with zero gravity. Howie, how are you going to change diapers in zero G? That's a scary thought. And finally, Howie said, look, Frank, why don't you make a presentation to the kids? They'd love it. And I'll ask the staff to come. I'll come. It'll be great. I was excited, really. I arrived early and little audience of 4- and 5-year-olds sitting there. And I told them all about space exploration, living on the moon, living on Mars. And I said at the end, how many of you would like to live in outer space? Everybody raised their hand except Masaki. Masaki said, but Mr. White, we are in space. Thank you, Masaki. I actually wrote about that in my book because it's a fundamental truth that we really don't experience every day. We are actually in space. When we talk about going into space, we're not really describing what happens. We're actually leaving Earth. And we've been doing that for a very small amount of time. On the other hand, astronomers have been studying the stars for thousands of years. And astronomers, people who look at the sky at night, tend to know the wisdom of Masaki, that we're on a spaceship, we're moving through the universe, we're actually exploring space. It is space exploration, whether you're doing astronomy or astronautics, really. So yeah, we're already in space. Mike Simmons, some of you might know, started Astronomers Without Borders. And he said, astronomy is the overview effect for the rest of us. I think that's true. Katie Coleman, an astronaut, recently retired, put it really well. She said, the Earth is our ship. Space is our home. One of the interesting things about interviewing astronauts is how many of them said, I found it surprising. I felt very much at home out there. There's something about that universe that's we're a part of that draws us and welcomes us, even though, you know, physically we can't live there without special equipment. But astronomy, I think, is a part of space exploration. It's an ancient part. Space flight is recent. But they both bring us awe and wonder. And in the same way, I would say. So how did I get interested in all of this? My first cousin, who I spent a lot of time with as a child, she tells me it all began when I was 5 years old. And she said we were sitting in the car waiting for our mothers to come out of the grocery store. And she claims, I turned to her and I said, Anne, do you know we can't live on Earth forever? We're going to have to go live on other planets. Planets don't last forever, you know. I don't know if that's true. I can't recall it, but what I do recall, like it happened yesterday, we lived in Germany. My dad was in the army. My mom walked in one day. She had a little book in her hand called Stars. It's a golden book of astronomy. It blew my mind. I thought, what? What is this? Stars, planets, nebulae, constellations. Oh my goodness. In spite of what my cousin says, I feel like I was asleep until I saw that book, and I got into astronomy. I had binoculars, I had telescopes. I remember one night when we lived in Meridian, Mississippi, I was out, we had a pretty good viewing of the sky, and I don't know what I was looking at, but I ran inside and I said to my parents, who needs TV? Who needs movies? Look at the sky. My goodness. Well, that lasted around until Sputnik, and I guess tomorrow is the anniversary of that amazing moment in time. 1957, Sputnik, many of us who are here today are old enough to remember it. It transformed America because we couldn't believe the Soviet Union had beat us to it. It was just amazing. I have to thank the Soviets for that. My college, my high school in Mississippi was upgraded enormously because of Sputnik. We had advanced classes. We had a big emphasis on science and math. The math part I didn't like much, but we had advanced classes in everything because we were going to single-handedly catch up. So my focus moved a little bit from astronomy to astronautics. I wrote to Werner von Braun over in Alabama and I said, how do I become a rocket scientist? And he wrote back and he said, study math, study calculus, study physics, chemistry. That sort of ended my interest. That wasn't my strength. I still thought maybe I could be an astronaut. And I started thinking about how I could do that. And my friends and I started launching rockets in the front yard, which all of them failed. I was really inspired by one of the astronauts I interviewed recently said, oh yeah, I did that. We put beetles on board and they would come back staggering around like, what happened to me. But anyway, Sputnik was, as you all know, a major milestone. And we talk about that being the beginning of the space age. And then another shock, Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth, 1961. First human in orbit, first human to experience the overview effect. Shortly thereafter, Alan Shepard, first American in space. Then there was the Apollo program. And then John Glenn was the first American to orbit Earth. And this whole idea that we've come to accept as something significant, this response to seeing the Earth from space and in space, it began to happen long before I coined the term. And anybody who looked at what was going on realized it. Some of you may know Stan Rosen, who's pretty active in National Space Society. Actually, Stan picked up on this back in the 70s and wrote about it. He didn't get the credit that he's due, but he saw what I saw and he wrote about it in the 70s. He did not coin the term, but he and I have become friends and I really appreciate his work. I want to share a little video with you here that I think is very interesting. It's hard to understand because it's in Russian and there's not really good captioning, but I just want you to get a feel for the excitement of that first launch into orbit, especially what Yuri Gagarin says.
Что должен сказать вам в эти последние минуты перед стартом? Вся моя жизнь кажется мне сейчас одним прекрасным мгновением. Все, что прожито, что сделано прежде, было прожито и сделано ради этой минуты. Есть старт. Протяжка 1. Есть протяжка. Продувка. 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 Есть продувка. Ключ задрена. Ключ задрена. Есть дренаж. Несколько раз перезагрузка. Желаю вам доброго полета. Желаю вам доброго полета. Все нормально. Спасибо, до свидания. До скорой встречи, дорогие друзья. Головного двигателя. Обзор вижу землю. Хорошо разлетела земля. Видимость отличная, хорошая видимость, прием. Я горя, как самочувствие, я горя, прием.
Well, we could go on. It's really an interesting film. Again, I just wanted you to feel a little of the excitement of that very first occurrence of not only spaceflight and orbiting, but of seeing the Earth in this unique way. And I don't believe it's in the film, but at some point there was a statement by Gagarin that was really anticipating what other astronauts have said about the overview effect, which is the Earth is so beautiful and we should find ways to preserve it and get beyond our conflict. And of course, again, as an American at the time, our whole perception of that flight was filtered through the Russians did it, not us. But now, of course, we have Yuri's Night, and the whole world celebrates that achievement. And that was created by my good friend and colleagues, the Whitesides, George and Loretta. And thank goodness that they did that. It's really appropriate. So moving on, this history could be very, very long, and I'll try to keep it short. I just want to mention one thing that we've realized, of course, is that going to the moon actually gave us a completely different perspective than orbital flight. I've categorized all of it as the overview effect, but when we talk about seeing the Earth from space, that's the orbital or suborbital hop version. Seeing the Earth in space, and I should point out this is not Earthrise. It's an iStock picture that I was able to obtain, but still, it gives you the understanding that you see the Earth against the backdrop of the cosmos. And Gene Cernan, when I interviewed him, said we've really had two different space programs, the orbital program and the lunar program. And for me, it was a transformational moment when Apollo 8 happened, because it was a bit of a surprise event. We didn't know they were going to do that. It was supposed to be an orbital flight preparation for ultimately the lunar landing. But then once again, we heard the Soviets were going to send someone to the moon. So at the last minute and courageously, NASA decided not to land there, but to send 3 astronauts to the vicinity of the moon and bring them back. And on the way, we had the first view of the whole Earth by an astronaut as they turned their camera around. I was in London at the time, and I thought, what is that? What am I seeing? And later on, the Earthrise photo, which was as they rounded the moon, we saw the Earth rising above the lunar surface. And of course, they had the famous reading of Genesis on Christmas Eve. These were milestone moments for the overview effect. And I think just about everybody agrees that Apollo 8 and the entire Apollo missions, all of them, had a huge impact on environmental thought. I'm skipping Apollo 11, not because it wasn't important, but because from the overview effect perspective, I think that Apollo 8 and Apollo 17 might have had more impact, because after Apollo 11 landed and we so-called won the space race, the last person on the moon was Eugene Cernan in 1972. And that crew, on returning, took this iconic photo, once again, iconic, and we know this is the blue marble. What a beautiful picture. And Apollo definitely changed our consciousness. No question about that. From the 1970s until the first shuttle launch in 81 was a bit of a quiet time for human spaceflight. We did have the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975, where the vision of countries cooperating rather than competing out there, you know, we had a little microcosm of that. Very important to me, and I think to many of us, including Leonard, Jerry O'Neill first began to promote the idea that maybe putting human civilization on planetary surfaces was not the only way to go, and maybe not the best way to go. And he promoted the notion of these freestanding human communities built with extraterrestrial materials. And many of us consider ourselves to be Jerry's kids, as it were. And many of the people who are prominent in the space movement got their start with Jerry. I would say this is when the non-governmental, not space program, but space movement began. And then, Leonard, remember this? We were a lot younger then. The National Commission on Space. President Reagan decided we needed to take a big picture look at where America was going. Leonard and I worked on it. We worked on the report. I know Marcia Smith and Linda Billings have been guests here. Marcia, as I recall, Leonard, was she executive director?
Right. She really ran the study every hour on the hour.
Yeah. Now you had a pretty prominent role too, as I recall.
I was director of research, which is a pretty cool title, and I've never worked so hard in my life trying to hold up to that title.
You did a great job. And then Linda Billings was on the commission, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But she was a staff member.
Right. Okay. I got into it because I went to see George Field, who was a commission member, and he was at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. And Peter Diamandis introduced me to George. I went to see him and I started talking about my ideas. And before I knew it, we'd been talking for a couple of hours. And he kind of took me on as a volunteer, I don't know what you would call it, staff member. And at one point I said to George, after going to some commission meetings, I said, you know, George, I don't quite know where the commission's headed, but it seems to me there are certain basic principles that are standing out, you know, a little bit like the Bill of Rights for the Constitution. And George said, why don't you write them up? I spent a whole weekend writing on these. I think it was the Declaration for Space and the 9 principles for exploring and settling the solar system. George sent them to Tom Paine, who was former NASA administrator. And Tom Paine invited me out to a meeting. I'm pretty sure it was at Stanford, Leonard.
Yeah, it was. We had them at Stanford. one of them.
So here I am, this young person with, I mean, I was relatively young at the time. I had no background, no reputation, no nothing. I found myself standing up before Chuck Yeager, Neil Armstrong, Jerry O'Neill. I'm not even sure if Chuck Yeager was there, but I know that I'm pretty sure Neil Armstrong and Jerry were there talking about these principles. And if you read the report, they're actually in there. And I remember, Leonard, you and I talking about it at dinner afterward, and we thought it was pretty cool, kind of similar to the forming of the United States Constitution. I think that was a great report. It was beautifully produced. It didn't even look like a government report. There were beautiful pictures in it. And the Challenger accident happened right about the time in 1986 that report was going to come out. And because of Challenger and the shock, it was just very hard for people to get their minds around this bold 50-year plan for exploring and developing the solar system. And I really do believe that if the Challenger accident had not occurred right about that time, that would have been one government report that actually would have been implemented, or at least people might have paid attention to it in a much more significant way. But I include quite a bit about it in the book because I still think that the commission did great work. Not long after that, I did have the experience, and I do call it an epiphany without apology. I was obsessing about Jerry O'Neill's ideas while flying cross country, and I was asking, what would it be like to live in outer space permanently? And as I was looking down at the ground, it occurred to me, I would have an overview of the Earth. I would always see it as a whole system in which everything is interrelated or interconnected. The term overview effect came to mind right away. And on landing, I decided, well, what am I going to do? I have a hypothesis for a theory. How do I gather any kind of data for this? There are no space people. There's nobody living permanently in outer space. So I thought, well, maybe I could interview astronauts as proxies. And I called up NASA and I said, I have to interview all the astronauts right away. And the guy at the other end of the line kind of chuckled. And he said, well, the astronauts are rather busy right now. If you come to Houston on your own ticket, I'll give you 2 active astronauts to interview. And I thought, wow, that's not a big sample size. I was really thinking about an academic study, not a book. But I said, okay. And he said, why don't you interview retired astronauts? What? He said, we don't control them. I said, you don't? He said, no, interview them. So that was what I started doing. I did go to Houston. I interviewed Jeff Hoffman. I believe it's possible he's the only astronomer who's become an astronaut. And he had a distinguished 5-shuttle mission career. He helped to repair Hubble, and he and I are still friends. And he has actually got an experiment on Mars called MOXIE to make oxygen out of the Martian atmosphere. But I began interviewing astronauts and I realized, oh, this is really great, because they told me, yeah, something does happen, and it's similar to what happened to you on the plane. But the big turnaround was, I imagined the overview effect being ordinary. you wouldn't, if you lived in an O'Neill community, you wouldn't be astonished to see the Earth the way you see it in the background here of my screen. We don't think it's extraordinary to see the moon in the sky. But if you're born on Earth and then you become an astronaut and you go into orbit or you go to the moon, something happens. It's a cognitive shift. You realize there are no borders or boundaries on this planet. I knew that intellectually, but now I know it experientially. You know, intellectually, the atmosphere is rather thin, but you're used to seeing the blue sky. And so I began to rethink what the overview effect is and began to understand that from the astronaut point of view, it's quite dramatic. Now there's a worldwide movement to bring the overview effect down to Earth, to bring this experience to more people. And these recent commercial space flights are part of that. You know, Leonard, you talked about as a writer, you know, you want to come up with something memorable. I have to tell you, for 20 years, I didn't think anybody was going to remember the overview effect. I didn't. I have said many times that I did not write my book to win a Nobel Prize for Literature or a Pulitzer. And I've been remarkably successful at that. In fact, the overview effect sales have been rather modest, but the idea has got legs, as they say. It has traction. And this recently, we had a big breakthrough in that NASA has embraced the idea of the overview effect. In 2019, I was invited by NASA back to Johnson Space Center, a little bit different this time. I interviewed 3 astronauts while they were on the International Space Station, which was a milestone. I'd never interviewed astronauts who were in outer space. And then I interviewed 7 astronauts, retired and active, in a NASA studio. All of this was recorded, and it became the basis for a series called Down to Earth. Down to Earth is on YouTube. You can look it up. And there are 19 3 or 4 minute short videos. And there's a 30-minute documentary, which is excellent. You won't see me, but I did do some of those interviews. They really were interested in getting the astronaut story out, which I understand. And then it was really wonderful. Bill Nelson was in Congress and later in the Senate. I interviewed him for the first edition of the book because he was fascinated with spaceflight, and he actually convinced NASA to let him go on a shuttle flight. So he's in the first edition of the book. He's in the 4th edition of the book. It's a great interview. And in his very first talk to the entire NASA community, he talked about what he called my experience of the overview effect. He embraced the fact that NASA is doing many, many things, of course, that are valuable and great science, but also that the astronaut experience is a significant spinoff of what NASA does. And I want to just play a clip from one, I'm going to play the entire Down to Earth video with Tracy Caldwell Dyson. And I'm playing it because I'm then going to read to you some things she said about seeing the stars from outer space. And again, we don't hear much about this, but if you read my interviews with the astronauts, it's not just the Earth that they see uniquely. They are seeing the cosmos in a unique way. They are out there and they have a special opportunity to be a skywatcher. Let me play this for you.
My first look at the Earth from that vantage point was on ascent in my wrist mirror, looking at the aft window behind me, knowing that I was the first one that had to get out of their seat and film our external tank falling away. That was my first job, aside from all the monitoring that I had to do. And so my view of it was very fleeting and very technical. It was background to the task that I had at hand, and that was pointing a camera at an external tank so that it could be analyzed. Then when we got into orbit, we had a very fast-paced mission, which all space shuttle missions were. You had 10 to 12 days of fast-paced work. And it was my commander, Scott Kelly, who carved out 90 minutes of entire orbit on flight day 10. And he said to the rookies, the three of us, I want you guys all in that window, and I don't want you to move. And he already pre-coordinated it, got the lights turned off on the station so we could see everything in its grandeur. And that was the first moment that I had to really soak it in, and discovered a lot of things about my reaction to that view in that relatively short period of time. And then, of course, there was my space station flight where I lived up there for 6 months, and every night that I could, I was planted in that cupola, much like the picture shows, and gazing at it. And there wasn't a single regret I had about the time I spent there. In fact, it almost, I dare say, grieved me to think about how in the world am I going to describe this? There's no words. There's no picture I could take to do it justice. There's no watercolors that I could put on paper to come close to the vividness, the ever-changing picture that I see staring at this planet. Everything from the colors to what changes the atmosphere goes through, depending on where the sun angle is and whether the moon's in the view or not, to just how fast we're going over the surface of it and the way shadows are changing. You could see the same landmass over a period of 2 weeks and it looks completely different because of that. To then looking at the stars and the blackness, a black that nothing here on Earth ever can replicate. And then you look at the space station around you and you're like, this is amazing. And all the people who are a part of this structure that are, I know, either at their desks, creating the next great marvel, or they're sitting in mission control, controlling everything they see. And that's where it kind of hits you. You are but a small fraction of the human race that will ever get to see this the way it is right now.
So sorry that was somewhat small, but I think you got the basic impact of what she was saying. And this is out of my book. I wanted to read this to you because it's relevant to stargazing. Tracy said, when you look at stars from Earth, you're looking through an atmosphere. So the stars twinkle and you're looking at them in a two-dimensional plane. And though you see that some stars are brighter than others, you really don't see any depth between them. But when you're above the atmosphere, the stars don't twinkle. They are a pretty solid bright. You're surprised at how sharp and steady they are. Then as you gaze even deeper and you let your focal point change, it's much like graphic art, where once you allow your focal point to go beyond the plane of the paper, this image jumps out at you. It was the same thing for me and the stars. I could all of a sudden detect depth. Now, I couldn't tell you how much, but it's light years, right? And it's like, whoa, I can somehow tell that that star is closer than that star. And that was something that knocked my socks off. And I thought, nobody told me about this. She also said that she could see colors. And other astronauts have told me that they could see the colors as well as the depth of the stars when they're in space. So the overview effect and the cosmos, the overview effect and astronomy do begin to come together in a way. But this is only the beginning of our adventure. Space exploration, what I've discovered about it through writing about it is it changes our consciousness, whether we explore space physically or mentally, whether we're astronauts or astronomers. And the view from Mars is going to be something else altogether. Leonard and I have talked about, will there be an overview effect on Mars? Well, not exactly, in the sense that when we go to Mars and land there and start looking out at the cosmos, the Earth is going to be a single point of light. If you're on the moon or you're in orbit, you can still see a recognizable globe with continents and oceans. But from Mars, it's going to be much more like a star, but one that isn't twinkling. And as far as Mars goes, we've seen it as a whole system from day one. And so very, very few people, unless they're born on Mars and then have that revelatory experience of seeing it from a distance, will have the same kind of overview effect we've had on Earth. But think about it. Think about being an astronomer on Mars. We're going to have a new era for astronomy as we move from being a multi-species planet to a multi-planet species. What's going on now is really exciting. Suddenly, non-professionals are having the experience Yuri Gagarin had and Tracy Caldwell Dyson. Professional astronauts have never gone into orbit or to the International Space Station or to the moon. They've never gone to experience the overview effect. It was almost like a byproduct. Nobody expected it. Joe Allen said, with all the reasons for going to the moon, nobody said we should do it to look at the Earth. But that may in fact be the most important reason. Now, the new astronauts are primarily going to have the experience. They want this experience. They prepare for it. And yet, are they even prepared? And as Leonard said, not only that, SpaceX created a special viewing platform for them. And even though they were ready for it, let's take a look at what happened when they actually removed the cover from the cupola and looked at the planet.
Oh my gosh.
it. Whoa.
Oh my gosh.
So, we all know what Neil Armstrong said when he stepped on the moon. Small step for a man, giant leap for mankind. We're always looking for these really profound statements. Did you hear what was said when they removed the cover of the cupola? The statement by the Inspiration 4 crew? Did anybody get it? Holy shit.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, holy bleep. People often ask me if the overview effect is a spiritual experience, and I've always said, well, it depends on the person and the situation and what's spiritual for them. And well, I think now we can say after a holy bleep, yes, it must be a spiritual experience. But you saw the awe, the wonder. I mean, this is a characteristic, I think. I've had Mike Simmons say to me, when I show somebody Saturn through a telescope, it's the same thing. It's that same feeling of again, being inspired by how amazing this universe is that we're part of. So where are we? I want to summarize here and have some questions. So far, so good. We've accomplished a lot in a short period of time. In terms of evolution on Earth, 4.5 billion years. We've only been at this for a while. Some 550 people have left the planet for brief periods. Virgin Galactic has 600 plus people lined up. But we still don't have those future space people that I imagined when I first had the epiphany that led to the book. However, in the space of 2 months, something like that, we've had the Virgin Galactic flight, the Blue Origin flight, Inspiration 4. It really is a new era, and that was recognized by the media as they looked at it. I believe the next stage is going to be large-scale space migration. That is why I've created the Human Space Program, because I want to raise some of the big questions that face us as we spill out into the solar ecosystem. We haven't done a great job with the environment of our planet. I hope we can start looking at the solar system as our new environment and bring this consciousness that the overview effect provides into our space exploration activities as we actually move toward having people live permanently off of the Earth. What do we think the next 50 years is going to look like? What do you all think? Jeff Bezos has talked about 1 trillion people living off of planet Earth. I think we probably need to see billions moving off of the Earth in order to ease the stress and strain of human civilization on our home planet. I think we'll have observatories on the moon. Will we have cities on Mars? Leonard, you wrote a book about that. And Elon Musk says, yes, we're going to do it. 1 million people at least. There are plenty of people who want to create O'Neill communities. Leonard, you mentioned the UAP report. The government's finally admitted they don't know what the UAPs are. That's a big step forward for them. After telling everybody who saw UFOs that they weren't seeing anything, the government's finally said, well, maybe you did see something. We don't know what they are, but we'll try to find out. There's a lot of people who are involved in contacting extraterrestrial civilizations through radio astronomy. One of the most interesting questions is, since humans can only live without special equipment on 30% of our own planet, what will happen as we move into environments that are totally incompatible with us organically? One of the great things about being an astronomer is mentally, you can go to other planets, other galaxies. You can roam the universe without special equipment other than a telescope. But if you're going to be an astronaut or a space community member, you're going to have either special equipment or you yourself are going to adapt. And there is speculation that we may evolve into a different species, far more adapted to the rigors of life off of planet Earth. I would just close by saying, I just don't know how anybody can't be excited about this new era. I just go back to that moment in Meridian, Mississippi, where I ran inside to my parents and said, who needs TV? And I think, I still say the same, whether your vision is looking through a telescope or getting on a flight on, SpaceX. It's all about learning who we are, where we are in the universe, and our consciousness of who we are and where we are. And I just want to close by saying, as far as my work goes, I'm not the hero of the story, the astronauts are. We have to understand, and we found out with Challenger, for example, we have to understand everybody who climbs onto one of those rockets risks their lives. And my job has just been to share their message with you. And I think it's an important message. And thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. It's been great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we really enjoyed
Thanks
it
very
too.
much, Frank.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we always like to clap, even if you can't hear us.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Good. Yeah. So everyone, do you have some comments or with some of those questions that Frank?
Yeah, I've got a comment and a question. That was a totally wonderful talk. Very much appreciate it.
Okay.
Watching Yuri Gagarin take off earlier in your talk, I couldn't help but think that it's been 60 years until this summer when we saw similar launches. There's been a gap of, well, there were the years following Gagarin when we went to the moon, but at least there's been a 50-year gap. And so you asked us to think about what's going to happen in the next 50 years. And, I could have my imaginations from what I had in the early 60s, but that didn't happen. And it's a problem. I do have a specific question about George Field.
Uh-huh.
George Field in the late 70s, there was a meeting of the American Astronomical Society at one end of Waikiki and a meeting of the Division for Planetary Sciences at the other end of Waikiki at the same time. And George Field gave a talk saying, "To hell with you planetary scientists. You know, the Hubble's, well, it wasn't called Hubble Space Telescope. It's called the Large Space Telescope. That's going to be for astronomers and astrophysicists, and to hell with you planetary people. And that was a horrible, horrible long-term dampening of relationships between astronomers and planetary scientists. Yet you say in the 80s, and I don't really know what George Field was doing in the 80s, but he's part of this commission. Did he change his attitude, or what happened with him?
His attitude on that particular question, I really don't know. And it really doesn't sound like the George Field I knew to say something like that. Yeah, I think he did change his attitude a little bit in the sense of becoming more interested in the question of, you know, space exploration, physical space exploration, as opposed to astronomy. And I remember that he and I gave a talk at Harvard to Harvard students about the commission report. And he asked them, what do you think? You know, why isn't Harvard more interested in this topic? And they said, that's for MIT. we don't get into that stuff.
You're talking to somebody who hated Harvard as an undergraduate, but loved MIT, where I got my PhD.
Well, I have to say, I love MIT too, because of what it brings to the table. And it's really different. You know, back in the 19th century, Harvard tried to absorb MIT. I don't know if you know that, but yeah, Harvard realized it was deficient in science and technology, and they tried to merge with MIT, and MIT alumni completely squelched the deal. Yeah, I don't know. I did hear recently that George is still alive. I've not been in touch with him, but I'm grateful to him for helping me become part of the commission, because I enjoyed it quite a lot.
I have really good memories of George as a practical guy, because, you know, you had Jerry O'Neill, you had, we had some really futuristic thinkers that were coming and going out of the commission. And George was pretty practical. But the thing that I remember about George Field to this day, and I think of it almost every day, we had so much to do in a short period of time to write the final report. And I was complaining to George. I said, there's too much to get into this thing. How are we going to do this? And he looks at me, he goes, right from the gut. That's all I remember. And I think of him every day, you know, when trying to sort what you want to write, but you write from the guts.
Really.
Yeah.
Anybody else? They got a question?
Or
Comments?
I have a question. So I haven't read all of Cosmo Perspective, but I've read the overview effect. And one thing I was thinking about is that, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, when humans leave Earth, we have this perspective of Earth going, holy bleep, right? But I wonder if when people that are born on Mars or wherever else in the cosmos, and they return to Earth, similar to what happens in sci-fi movies, if they're going to have a holy bleep moment, or if it's going to be, well, this is just another place. That, you know what I mean? So the overview effect becomes lost on people that are born elsewhere.
Yeah. You mean the shock or the sense of awe about it?
Yeah, well, do you think that there'll still be a sense of awe for people coming from somewhere else, returning to Earth, not having been born here, seeing it as, the system that we might see it?
Yeah, I think it really does depend on where they are. If they're on the moon, that's going to be very different from Mars, because the Earth is going to be a constant presence. like the moon is for us. If they're in an O'Neill community, which is imagined to be at the Lagrange points between the Earth and the moon, they'll be seeing the Earth all the time. If they're on Mars, that's going to be really different. We often talk about humans living on the moon and Mars as if it's kind of the same thing. And the distance is so great that I think it's going to be quite different. And it is possible that for someone born on Mars, let's say, coming back and seeing the Earth from a distance might be wholly bleak. I don't know. One thing I've been exploring recently is that when my dad was in the Army and we lived in Germany, the kids who lived in Germany, most of us were born in the United States. We didn't choose to be in Germany. We were taken there because our fathers went there. We had this mystical view of the States. Everything was great in the States. Everything we didn't have in Germany, you would have in America. And I recall that was it. How long do we have to stay here till we can go back to the States? I've wondered, and I've started writing about, will it be like that for kids whose parents migrate to Mars? I don't want to go to Mars, Dad. Well, we're going, we're going to have a better life there. And it was the same thing. I mean, when we lived there, there was no way you could go visit the States. It was too expensive. It was too long of a trip. And so I wonder if people living far away from the Earth will begin to have this aura about it. And of course, we also know that anybody born on Mars and living on Mars is going to have a hard time physically being back here. So I don't know. I really do think, though, that a lot has to do with the distance, because the moon, especially with technology getting so predictable and safe comparatively, the idea of the moon and the Earth being sort of the same system, and the moon almost being a suburb, I believe could become more realistic than it being a frontier. But I always thought, as I said in the beginning of my talk, that for people living in an O'Neill community, they wouldn't be that impressed with seeing the Earth from a distance. That would just be part of their everyday life.
What didn't you have in Germany that you thought you'd have in the US?
Tootsie Rolls.
Tootsie Rolls, really?
Yeah.
Well, this is another thing I'm writing about. We actually had almost everything. My dad was an engineer, so he was involved. And we were on a base where there were 25,000 Americans, and it was pretty self-contained. We had movie theater, baseball field, football field, gymnasium, commissary, PX, church, school. And I really think in order to have large scale migration to a place like Mars, you're going to have pretty comfortable living situation, because there will be people who are willing to live on the frontier, but if their families are going to go, they're not going to want to do that. Yeah. I mean, I said Tootsie Rolls, but in my mind at 10 years old, that was pretty important. But the truth was, we had a lot of the same things we had in the United States. A lot of it was mythical. I mean, it was stuff we made up as kids. And the other side of the coin was, if you were a curious kid, like I was, I loved going to castles. I loved getting off the base and going to Paris and going to battlefields. And, the Rhine River is dotted with castles. And if you're interested in knights in the Middle Ages, it was a wonderful place. And I think, again, you know, when you're living in outer space and you don't have all the luxuries of living on Earth, if your mind is curious, you're going to find compensations, I think, for that.
Yeah. Anyone else have comments or questions? I want to respond to your ET question. Will we see them? Actually, who knows who came into Estes Park last night? There was John, you sent me some videos of that. People, you know, the skies lit up, houses were lit up by something that came in. I'm not sure what it was.
It had to be a meteor. It was so fast, man. It was.
Did you actually saw it, but you didn't capture it on your GoPro?
No, I was taking the dog out to do her business. And
At 4:30
she
in
looked,
the morning.
yeah, she woke me up, and she, you know, it was the craziest thing. She looked up and I looked up, you know, seeing what, because the mountain lines are around and didn't want that to come down. And, you know, it was like 3 seconds long and it was so incredibly bright and fast. It was fantastic. So, I mean, those videos that, I mean, it was straight overhead. It looked, Frank said, you know, you could see 3D with these, you know, the astronauts say you can see 3D with the stars. This thing looked like it was coming straight down. It
At
was
you?
phenomenal. Oh, it's the best thing I've ever seen. Wow. Okay. One of the best things.
Well, have we got Skycam of that? I mean, somebody must have got it on a,
You know,
So
that's
there's,
working.
there were, CBS 4 seems to have the biggest collection of these,
oh, okay.
who knew these rings and halos and things were going to be a boon for astrophotography or these things. So
Yeah.
some of them don't show, most of these videos show how bright it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
A few of them show the, you know, the thing coming in, but yeah.
good. Hey,
And-
Frank, I always wanted to ask you this, and I'm not sure I ever